She cried alone in her room, the darkness of the night matching the emptiness in her soul. The weight of expectations, disappointments, and a sense that her life had no real purpose crushed against her chest. Her prayers felt like whispers lost in a violent storm, unheard and unanswered. In that moment of profound desolation, when tears were her only companions, something extraordinary happened. A gentle yet unmistakable voice seemed to speak directly to her heart, saying simply, "Get up. You were chosen." Those words, carrying both command and promise, pierced through her despair. Have you ever experienced a moment like this? When the world around you seems colorless? When your faith feels like a hollow ritual? When you wonder if God truly hears you at all? That tension between our deepest spiritual yearnings and the mundane reality of our daily lives creates a wound in many souls today. What if I told you that this experience isn't a sign of failure in your spiritual journey, but potentially the beginning of something profound? What if these moments of darkness can become doorways to the most authentic encounter with God you've ever known? The story of transformation through darkness isn't just a comforting idea. It's at the very heart of Ignatian spirituality, and it begins with understanding what it truly means to be chosen by God. The concept of being chosen often carries misconceptions in our modern religious understanding. We tend to associate being chosen with special privileges, with comfort, or with a life free from suffering. We imagine that those truly favored by God will experience constant consolation and clarity in their spiritual lives. Yet the authentic spiritual tradition, especially as understood by Saint Ignatius of Loyola, offers us a dramatically different perspective. To be chosen by God often means to be invited into a deeper participation in the very pattern of Christ's life, which includes both moments of light and periods of profound darkness. When Ignatius himself experienced his conversion, it wasn't during a moment of spiritual ecstasy or dramatic revelation. It came instead during a period of forced convalescence, when his leg was shattered by a cannonball at the Battle of Pamplona. Confined to his bed in physical pain and spiritual emptiness, he began to notice something extraordinary happening within his soul. When he read stories of courtly romance and chivalry, he felt momentary pleasure that quickly faded to emptiness. But when he read the lives of Christ and the saints, a lasting peace and sense of purpose remained with him long after he set the books aside. This experience of discerning between temporary emotional states and lasting spiritual movements became the foundation of his spiritual outlook, and it began not in triumph, but in suffering and limitation. This pattern appears repeatedly throughout Scripture and the lives of saints. The call of God often comes not in moments of strength and clarity, but in periods of weakness and confusion. Think of Moses, hiding from his past in the wilderness when the burning bush appeared. Consider David, the overlooked youngest son tending sheep when Samuel arrived to anoint him king. Reflect on Mary, a young woman from an insignificant town when the angel announced she would bear the Messiah. The consistent message throughout salvation history is that God's choice falls precisely upon those who seem, by worldly standards, to be the least qualified, the least prepared, the least worthy. And yet, this is exactly where divine wisdom manifests most powerfully. When we feel most broken, most uncertain, most alone, this is often the fertile ground where God plants the seeds of our unique calling. The world tells us that worthiness precedes calling, that we must first perfect ourselves before we can be used by God. But the spiritual reality revealed through Ignatius teaches us that calling precedes worthiness. We are chosen not because we are already complete, but precisely in our incompleteness, where God's grace can most powerfully manifest. This paradoxical understanding of divine election emerges from deep theological roots. In Christian tradition, particularly as articulated in Ignatian spirituality, being chosen isn't primarily about receiving special status or privileges. Instead, it's an invitation to participate more fully in what theologians call the kenosis of Christ, his self-emptying love for the world. This concept, drawn from the beautiful hymn in Philippians, describes how Christ emptied himself, taking the form of a servant. Surprisingly, the ultimate demonstration of divinity wasn't in power or privilege, but in vulnerable, self-giving love. When God chooses someone, it's an invitation to this same pattern, not to exemption from suffering, but to finding transcendent meaning within it. This represents one of the most counterintuitive aspects of authentic faith. While our natural instinct is to interpret suffering as evidence of God's absence, the Ignatian perspective suggests that our periods of desolation might be precisely where God is working most deeply in our lives. Consider Teresa of Avila, who once complained to God about her sufferings, to which she heard the response, "This is how I treat my friends." Her famous reply, "No wonder you have so few," captures the tension we all feel. Yet Teresa, like Ignatius, came to understand that spiritual growth often requires periods of difficult purification. Or consider the experience of Mother Teresa, who revealed in her private writings that she experienced decades of spiritual darkness, while externally serving as an icon of faith to millions. During this dark night, she continued her work among the poorest of the poor, even without the consolation of feeling God's presence. This seeming contradiction represents a profound spiritual truth. Authentic faith isn't dependent on our emotional states or spiritual consolations. The person who continues to serve, to love, to remain faithful, even when God seems distant, may actually be demonstrating the deepest and most mature form of spirituality. Ignatius himself distinguishes between what he calls consolation and desolation in the spiritual life. Consolation is when we feel God's presence, when prayer comes easily, when we experience joy and peace in our faith. Desolation is when God seems distant, when prayer is difficult, when we feel spiritual dryness or darkness. Most people naturally prefer consolation, but Ignatius recognized that both states serve important functions in our spiritual development. Consolation confirms and encourages us, while desolation purifies and tests the authenticity of our commitment. If we only remained faithful during periods of spiritual comfort, how would we know if we truly loved God for Himself, or merely for the good feelings He sometimes provides? I'd like to pause for a moment here and ask you something important. Have you ever found yourself in a period of spiritual darkness, wondering if God has abandoned you? That experience when prayers feel empty, when religious practices that once brought comfort now seem hollow, when doubts cloud your mind and your heart feels numb to the divine presence? I want you to know that you're not alone in this experience. Saint Ignatius himself went through profound periods of desolation, even contemplating suicide at his lowest point before his conversion. If this resonates with your own journey, I invite you to share in the comments. You can simply write, "I've walked through darkness too," and if you feel comfortable, briefly tell us about your experience. Your willingness to be vulnerable might be exactly what someone else needs today to feel less alone in their own spiritual winter. Sometimes, acknowledging our shared struggles is the first step toward finding a path through them. The community that forms around authentic spiritual sharing becomes a light that illuminates the way forward for all of us. The practical dimension of Ignatian spirituality offers us concrete methods for navigating these complex spiritual landscapes. Unlike some spiritual traditions that focus exclusively on mystical experiences or doctrinal knowledge, Ignatius developed exercises and practices designed to help ordinary people discern God's presence and purpose in their daily lives. Perhaps the most famous of these is the spiritual exercises, a structured program of meditation, contemplation, and discernment typically conducted over approximately 30 days, though adaptations for people in active life also exist. Within these exercises, Ignatius offers a remarkable tool called the exam, a daily practice of prayerful reflection that helps us recognize God's activity in the seemingly mundane details of our lives. The exam typically involves 5 steps: becoming aware of God's presence, reviewing the day with gratitude, paying attention to emotions that arose during the day, choosing one feature of the day to pray about, and looking forward to tomorrow. This simple practice, when done consistently, trains us to see what Ignatius called God in all things, the divine presence permeating even ordinary experiences. For someone experiencing that sense of crying alone in their room, feeling abandoned or purposeless, the exam offers a gentle way to begin recognizing threads of meaning and divine presence that might otherwise go unnoticed. Another powerful Ignatian method is what he called composition of place, or imaginative contemplation. Rather than approaching Scripture as merely informational text, Ignatius invites us to enter imaginatively into biblical scenes, using all our senses to participate in the events described. We're encouraged to see the colors, hear the sounds, feel the textures, smell the aromas, and even taste what might be present in the scene. Through this imaginative engagement, the stories of faith become not distant historical accounts, but living realities that speak directly to our current circumstances. For the person who feels chosen yet confused about what that means, imaginative contemplation of scenes like the calling of the disciples or Mary's Annunciation can provide profound insights and emotional connection to their own experience of being called. Ignatius also developed a sophisticated understanding of what he called discernment of spirits, learning to recognize the different interior movements that influence our thoughts, feelings, and decisions. He observed that both God and what he called the enemy of human nature attempt to influence us, but they do so in recognizably different patterns. By learning to identify these patterns, we can better understand when we are being drawn toward authentic purpose and when we are being distracted or discouraged from it. For instance, Ignatius noted that when a person is moving generally toward God, moments of spiritual consolation should be accepted gratefully but held lightly, while experiences of desolation should be met with patience, increased prayer, and the knowledge that they will pass. The opposite applies to those moving away from God. This nuanced approach acknowledges the complexity of interior life without simplistic formulas. One particularly relevant Ignatian concept for those experiencing a sense of being chosen amid confusion is what he called election, the process of making significant life choices in alignment with divine purpose. Ignatius outlines several different times or situations in which important decisions might be made. The first time is a rare, unmistakable divine clarity, like Paul's experience on the road to Damascus. The second involves clear emotional movements toward or away from options. The third, most common situation is when we must use our rational faculties illuminated by faith to discern the best path forward. For this third time, Ignatius offers practical methods including creating a balance sheet of reasons for and against different options, imaginatively considering what advice we would give to someone else in our situation, and reflecting on how our decision might appear at the end of our life or on Judgment Day. These concrete practices ground lofty spiritual concepts in practical reality. The path Ignatius himself walked demonstrates these principles in action. After his initial conversion experience while recovering from his war wound, he underwent a period of excessive asceticism and scrupulosity at Manresa, where he lived in a cave, neglected his appearance, and engaged in extreme fasting and penances. During this time, he experienced terrifying visions and contemplated suicide, feeling abandoned by God despite his fervent devotions. This period of intense desolation eventually gave way to profound spiritual insights, including a mystical experience by the river Cardinal that he later described as providing more light than all his other spiritual experiences combined. What's remarkable about Ignatius's journey is how he moved from these intense personal experiences to a life of practical service and organized ministry. Unlike some mystics who remained in contemplative seclusion, Ignatius felt called to help others navigate their own spiritual journeys. He gathered companions, pursued education despite being much older than his classmates, and eventually founded the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, which would become one of history's most influential religious orders. The Jesuit motto, "For the greater glory of God," captures the essence of what Ignatius called magis, the more, the constant seeking of what would serve God's purposes most fully in any given situation. This movement from personal spiritual experience to outward service illustrates a central Ignatian principle. Authentic encounters with God should ultimately lead us outward in love and service to others. The person crying alone who hears the call to get up is not being summoned merely to personal spiritual satisfaction, but to a larger purpose that connects them to the needs of the world. This balance between contemplation and action is captured in the Ignatian ideal of being contemplatives in action, people who maintain deep spiritual awareness while actively engaged in worldly affairs and responsibilities. This integrated spirituality stands in contrast to approaches that create false dichotomies between spiritual and material concerns. For Ignatius, authentic spirituality permeates every dimension of human experience, from intimate prayer to social engagement, from personal choices to institutional structures. This holistic vision is particularly relevant in our fragmented modern culture, where people often compartmentalize different aspects of their lives. The woman who hears "Get up, you were chosen" in her moment of despair isn't being called to leave behind her ordinary responsibilities for some purely spiritual realm. Instead, she's being invited to discover transcendent purpose within those very responsibilities, to find God not by escaping the world, but by engaging it with new vision. Ignatius himself modeled this integration through his tireless work establishing schools, sending missionaries to distant lands, advising political and religious leaders, caring for prostitutes and orphans in Rome, and developing detailed organizational structures for the Jesuit order. For him, administrative tasks were not distractions from spirituality, but expressions of it. This practical spirituality extended to his approach to obedience as well. While maintaining profound respect for church authority, he also demonstrated remarkable independence when necessary, sometimes spending years patiently negotiating with church officials to secure approval for innovative approaches to ministry and formation. This balanced approach offers wisdom for navigating the complex relationship between individual conscience and community authority that many believers struggle with today. What does all this mean for your daily life? How might these Ignatian insights transform your experience from crying alone to recognizing your chosen status and purpose? First, consider adopting the daily exam as a regular practice. This simple prayer, which can take as little as 10 minutes, helps train your attention to recognize God's presence in the ordinary moments you might otherwise overlook. Many people find that even during periods of spiritual dryness, the exam helps them maintain a tenuous but real connection to divine purpose. Second, Ignatius would encourage you to pay attention to patterns in your interior experiences. When do you feel most alive, most authentic, most connected to something larger than yourself? When do you feel drained, diminished, or pulled towards self-absorption? These patterns often reveal important clues about your unique calling. The activities and relationships that consistently bring you deep, lasting peace, even when they involve challenge or sacrifice, may point toward your particular way of contributing to what Ignatius called the greater glory of God. Third, consider the possibility that your periods of desolation, those times of crying alone, might themselves be spiritually significant. Rather than simply trying to escape these difficult emotions, Ignatian spirituality invites you to remain present to them while asking, what might God be teaching me through this experience? How might this suffering be connecting me more deeply to the pattern of Christ's life? What attachments or illusions might need to be purified through this difficult passage? Fourth, Ignatius would encourage you to find a spiritual companion or director, someone with whom you can honestly share your journey, including both consolations and desolations. The spiritual exercises were never meant to be navigated alone. They presume the presence of a wise guide who can help discern the movements of various spirits and offer perspective when our own vision becomes clouded. In today's world, trained spiritual directors continue this tradition, offering accompaniment without imposing predetermined outcomes on your unique journey. Fifth, consider how your individual calling connects to the needs of your community and world. Ignatius consistently directed his followers toward what he called the more universal good, the choices and commitments that would have the most significant positive impact. This doesn't necessarily mean dramatic or visible forms of service. It means discerning where your particular gifts meet the world's particular needs in your specific circumstances. For a parent, this might mean focusing primarily on raising children with love and wisdom. For a professional, it might mean bringing exceptional integrity and compassion to your field. For someone with limited resources or health challenges, it might mean offering prayer and encouragement to others. The specifics vary widely, but the principle remains. Authentic purpose always connects individual fulfillment with contribution to the common good. Sixth, Ignatius would invite you to develop what he called holy indifference. Not apathy, but a spiritual freedom that allows you to embrace whatever circumstances best serve God's purposes. This means holding all created things, possessions, relationships, reputation, health, and even life itself, in an open palm, rather than a clenched fist. When we cling too tightly to our own preferences and plans, we often miss the unexpected ways God might be working. Holy indifference allows us to remain responsive to evolving circumstances without being overwhelmed by attachment to particular outcomes. Finally, remember that the command to get up that follows being chosen is an invitation to action, not just contemplation. While Ignatius valued prayer deeply, he consistently emphasized that authentic spiritual experience should bear fruit in loving service. Sometimes the most direct path out of existential despair is simple acts of compassion toward others. When we fixate exclusively on our own spiritual states, we often become trapped in cycles of self-absorption that intensify rather than alleviate suffering. The paradoxical wisdom of Christian tradition suggests that by losing our life in service to others. We often find it in unexpected ways. The journey from desolation to purpose isn't typically instantaneous or permanent. Most people who have walked this path describe it as a spiral rather than a straight line, repeatedly encountering similar challenges at deeper levels. The woman who hears, "Get up, you were chosen," in her moment of tears may indeed experience a profound turning point, but she will likely face future moments of doubt, confusion, and spiritual dryness. Ignatius himself, even after his dramatic conversion and mystical experiences, continued to struggle with scrupulosity and periods of darkness throughout his life. The difference wasn't the absence of difficulty, but a new framework for understanding it and new tools for navigating it. This realistic perspective on spiritual development offers both challenge and comfort. The challenge comes in recognizing that meaningful transformation typically involves ongoing struggle rather than a once-and-for-all breakthrough. Hollywood conversion narratives that suggest permanent resolution often set up unrealistic expectations that lead to disillusionment. The comfort comes in knowing that periods of returning darkness don't necessarily indicate failure or abandonment. They may be integral to the maturing of authentic faith. Another common question concerns discernment in complex situations. What happens when multiple options seem potentially aligned with divine purpose? What if the voice saying, "Get up, you were chosen," doesn't specify exactly what you're chosen for? Here, Ignatius offers several practical approaches. One involves what he called the third time of election, where we use our rational faculties, illuminated by faith and prayer, to evaluate options. Another involves careful attention to what he called consolation without preceding cause, moments of unexpected peace, joy, or clarity that aren't readily explained by external circumstances. Ignatius considered these experiences particularly trustworthy guides. He also recommended experimental action, tentatively moving in a particular direction while remaining attentive to its fruits in terms of peace, energy, and connection to God and others. Rather than waiting for complete certainty before acting, this approach involves prayerful testing of different possibilities. Many people also wonder how to navigate relationships with others who don't share their spiritual perspective or understand their sense of calling. Here, Ignatius modeled remarkable flexibility and cultural adaptation. When sending Jesuits to distant lands, he instructed them to respect local customs and adapt their approaches accordingly, while maintaining the essence of their mission. This inculturation extended to his approach to individuals as well. Rather than imposing identical spiritual practices on everyone, he carefully adapted his guidance to each person's unique temperament, circumstances, and stage of development. This personalized approach suggests that living out your sense of being chosen doesn't require imposing your specific understanding on others. Instead, it involves finding ways to embody your values authentically while respecting different perspectives and seeking common ground where possible. Some struggle with integrating Ignatian spirituality into busy contemporary lives, dominated by professional responsibilities, family obligations, and constant digital connectivity. Here, Ignatius's concept of finding God in all things offers particular wisdom. Rather than seeing spirituality as something confined to explicitly religious activities that compete with other commitments for limited time, this perspective invites us to discover divine presence within our existing relationships and responsibilities. The busy parent changing diapers, the executive making difficult decisions, the teacher preparing lessons, the artist pursuing creative expression, the citizen engaging in community service. All these activities can become forms of prayer when approached with appropriate intention and awareness. This doesn't eliminate the need for dedicated prayer time, but it transforms our understanding of how ordinary activities relate to spiritual development. Throughout history, countless individuals have found in Ignatian spirituality a pathway from desolation to meaning, from isolation to purpose. Consider the experience of Dorothy Day, who co-founded the Catholic worker movement. Before her conversion, she lived a bohemian lifestyle marked by a failed marriage, an abortion, and deep existential questioning. Yet even in her pre-conversion years, she demonstrated remarkable compassion for marginalized people. When she eventually embraced faith, this compassion didn't disappear, but found new theological grounding and institutional expression. Through practices similar to those recommended by Ignatius, she gradually discerned a calling to live among the poor establish houses of hospitality, and advocate for justice. Despite facing criticism from both conservative Catholics who questioned her politics and progressive activists who questioned her faith, she maintained remarkable fidelity to her unique vocation. Her journey illustrates how the command to get up, following the recognition of being chosen, often leads not to conventional paths, but to creative integration of seemingly contradictory values. Or consider the story of Pedro Arrupe, a Jesuit who served as superior general of the society from 1965 to 1983. As a young Jesuit missionary in Japan, he witnessed the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and transformed his medical training into service for the wounded and dying. This traumatic experience profoundly shaped his understanding of faith and justice. Years later, as leader of the Jesuits during the turbulent post-Vatican II period, he helped the order navigate tremendous change while maintaining its essential charism. His famous prayer, "Fall in love," captures the essence of Ignatian spirituality. Nothing is more practical than finding God, than falling in love in a quite absolute final way. What you are in love with, what seizes your imagination, will affect everything. It will decide what will get you out of bed in the morning, what you do with your evenings, how you spend your weekends, what you read, whom you know, what breaks your heart, and what amazes you with joy and gratitude. Fall in love, stay in love, and it will decide everything. For Arrupe, as for Day, the path from desolation to purpose involved not escape from the world's suffering but deeper engagement with it, informed by contemplative practice and community support. More recently, consider the experience of Dr. Paul Farmer, who co-founded Partners in Health and revolutionized global healthcare for impoverished communities. Shaped by Jesuit education and Ignatian principles, Farmer combined rigorous medical science with profound moral vision, challenging the assumption that advanced treatments couldn't be provided in resource-poor settings. His preferential option for the poor in healthcare emerged from the same spiritual wellspring that informed Ignatius's own ministry among marginalized people in 16th century Rome. Like Day and Arrupe, Farmer's response to being chosen involved integrating contemplative awareness with practical action, personal compassion with systemic change. These diverse examples illustrate that the path from crying alone to purposeful action takes many forms, depending on individual gifts, circumstances, and the specific needs of each historical moment. What unites these journeys is not their external details, but their interior pattern. A movement from isolation to connection, from self-absorption to self-gift, from despair to determined hope. If the words, "Get up, you were chosen," have touched something in your heart today, if you recognize in your own experience that tension between desolation and calling, I invite you to subscribe to this channel, where we explore together the wisdom of saints like Ignatius, who have mapped the landscape of spiritual transformation. Each week we examine teachings that illuminate our path toward more authentic faith and purposeful living. These aren't abstract theories, but practical insights tested across centuries by people facing challenges similar to our own. You're not alone in wondering how to navigate periods of darkness or what it means to be chosen despite feeling unworthy. Many of us are walking this same path, asking these same questions. By joining this community, you'll find companions for the journey and resources for the road ahead. I would be honored to accompany you as we explore together how ancient wisdom speaks to contemporary struggles. Thank you for the attention you've given to these reflections today. Your willingness to engage deeply with these ideas suggests that something significant is already at work within you. The transformation from crying alone to embracing purpose represents a journey that encompasses our entire being: intellect, emotions, body, relationships, and actions. Ignatius understood that authentic spiritual development involves not just changed thinking, but changed living. Not just individual growth, but contribution to community. The voice that says, "Get up, you were chosen," initiates a process that gradually reorients every dimension of existence around a new center of meaning and value. This reorientation rarely happens instantaneously. It unfolds across time through consistent practice, supportive relationships, and repeated cycles of action and reflection. Some days you may feel the full force of your chosen status, experiencing clarity and purpose that illuminate everything around you. Other days, you may find yourself back in that room of tears, wondering if the voice was merely imagination. The Ignatian tradition acknowledges this rhythm of consolation and desolation as normal, even necessary for spiritual maturation. What changes over time is not the elimination of darkness, but your capacity to trust the process and continue walking faithfully even when immediate outcomes remain unclear. This journey from desolation to purpose carries profound implications for how we understand success, happiness, and meaning. Contemporary culture often promotes definitions of success focused on wealth accumulation, status achievement, or maximized pleasure. The Ignatian perspective offers a radically different vision. Success means alignment with divine purpose, regardless of external circumstances or outcomes. This alignment might sometimes coincide with conventional markers of achievement, but often it leads in quite different directions, toward simplicity rather than accumulation, service rather than status, integrity rather than expediency. Similarly, while modern definitions of happiness often emphasize positive emotional states and the absence of discomfort, the Ignatian understanding focuses on what he called consolation, not just pleasant feelings, but a deeper sense of rightness and connection that can persist even amid suffering or challenge. This understanding of happiness makes space for the full range of human emotional experience, while anchoring well-being in something more stable than emotional weather. What does it mean to hear, "Get up, you were chosen," in today's complex, often fractured world? It means recognizing that beneath the roles you play and the challenges you face lies an identity more fundamental than any social category or personal achievement. It means acknowledging that your life, with all its particularity, forms a unique point of divine presence and action in history. It means accepting that your moments of deepest pain and confusion might become doorways to your most meaningful contribution. It means embracing the paradox that being chosen confers both dignity and responsibility, both privilege and obligation. The woman crying in her room isn't promised that tears will never return. She's invited into a larger story where even tears find purpose. Perhaps what's most striking about the Ignatian vision is its fundamentally hopeful character, even while remaining clear-eyed about the reality of suffering and evil. Unlike philosophical Stoicism, which counsels emotional detachment in the face of pain, or certain forms of Buddhism, which emphasize the illusory nature of individual existence, Ignatian spirituality insists on the ultimate meaningfulness of our particular lives and struggles. While acknowledging the mystery of suffering, it refuses to surrender to nihilism or despair. This hope isn't based on naive optimism, but on a pattern recognized across countless lives. When people respond to that voice saying, "Get up, you were chosen," even tentatively, even imperfectly, something remarkable begins to unfold. Wounds become sources of compassion rather than simply scars of trauma. Limitations become invitations to community rather than simply barriers to achievement. Failures become opportunities for grace rather than simply evidence of inadequacy. The very specificity of your life, including its particular challenges and constraints, becomes the raw material through which purpose takes unique expression. This is the paradoxical heart of Ignatian spirituality. The universal divine presence is discovered not by transcending individual particularity, but by entering more fully into it. God is found not despite the concrete details of your existence, but through them. Perhaps you began watching this video feeling something like that woman crying alone, wondering if your tears signify only emptiness and abandonment. If so, I hope you've glimpsed the possibility of a different interpretation, that your very capacity for tears, for questioning, for longing, might itself be evidence of being chosen for something meaningful. The spiritual tradition Ignatius embodied doesn't offer quick fixes or superficial comfort. It offers instead a tested pathway from isolation to purpose, from fragmentation to integration, from despair to determined hope. This pathway involves specific practices: the exam, imaginative contemplation, discernment of spirits, finding God in all things, that have helped countless people across centuries discover hidden meaning within their unique circumstances. But beyond any specific technique or exercise lies a fundamental orientation: the willingness to trust that our deepest desires, properly understood, align with divine purpose rather than contradicting it. As Ignatius himself recognized through careful attention to his interior movements, authentic peace comes not from suppressing desire, but from purifying and directing it toward its true object. The voice that says, "Get up, you were chosen," speaks not against human desire, but to its deepest fulfillment. The journey ahead isn't perfectly linear or predictable. Like Ignatius himself, you may experience dramatic insights followed by periods of confusion, moments of clarity interrupted by returns to darkness. The path involves both consolation that encourages and desolation that purifies. What sustains the journey isn't the absence of difficulty, but the growing recognition of a pattern. Even the hardest passages eventually yield deeper understanding, expanded capacity for love, and more authentic alignment with purpose. Whether you're currently experiencing spiritual consolation or desolation, whether you feel confident in your chosen status or question whether you ever truly heard that voice at all, the invitation remains the same. Pay attention. Notice the movements of your heart, the patterns of your thoughts, the fruit of your actions. Seek companions who can help you discern authentic direction amid confusing signals. Remember that being chosen means being both gifted and sent, receiving unique grace and offering unique contribution. Trust that your specific combination of strengths and weaknesses, joys and sorrows, clarity and confusion, forms exactly the context in which your particular purpose takes shape. The transformation from crying alone to living with purpose rarely happens through dramatic intervention alone. It unfolds through faithful attention to ordinary moments, regular spiritual practice, supportive community, and persistent orientation toward love. The voice that says, "Get up," initiates the journey, but your daily choices sustain it. Each time you choose courage over comfort, authenticity over appearance, compassion over convenience, you take another step along the path Ignatius and countless others have walked. This journey changes not just your interior landscape, but your impact on the world around you. As you discover and embrace your chosen status, you become more fully yourself, and your authentic self becomes a gift to others in ways you might never fully recognize. Perhaps the ultimate fruit of hearing and responding to that voice in your moment of tears is becoming yourself a voice of hope for others in their darkness. Perhaps being chosen means becoming a channel through which others discover their own chosen status. Perhaps our deepest purpose is not just receiving divine life, but participating in its transmission. Not just being found, but helping others recognize that they have never been lost. If you found value in these reflections on finding purpose through Ignatian spirituality, please consider giving this video a like and subscribing to our channel. Your engagement helps these messages reach others who might be experiencing their own moment of tears and needing to hear that they too are chosen for purpose. Thank you for your presence here today.